I'm back. Okay. Welcome to the real world. This is how it rolls. You know what? To be honest, this is what you don't see when you're watching one of my videos that has been edited afterwards. Because let me tell you, mistakes happen. I make a mess. I trip over what I'm saying. I say the incorrect things. I will admit don't. I it's not a predisposition of mine to say bad words. So that doesn't happen. Okay, let's get back to making these scones. We've got the butter in here now. And now this is very important. And I know I have people like Suzanne, my friend Courtney's mom, who's making these along with me by hand. And of course, I have to say hi to my mom. I think she's just watching, probably with a nice cup of coffee right now. And oh, let me give a shout out to Krista, who is making these. How are they coming along, Krista? You're doing okay? Okay. So for everyone who's making these or will plan to make these, this is important. So you have this dry, crumbly mixture, and you still have visible pieces of butter. The key to making a flaky scone is to now get in there with your hands, and I want you to start flattening this crumbly mixture between your hands and see how it's flattening those pieces of butter. This is building in such a flakiness. It's absolutely amazing. So you don't have to do it too much. And if you have warm hands, just, a dozen little squishes between your hands is fine. And it actually, you can see this dry mixture transform just by making that flakiness. Okay, now, does everyone need to take a second to wipe their hands off? You go ahead and do that. The great thing about baking is by nature, you're washing your hands a lot, which is exactly what we're supposed to be doing these days. So I say bake more to stay safe. Okay, now it's time to add the liquids. I have my 3/4 of a cup of cold milk. And actually, this brings up a good point. I get asked a lot about the temperature of ingredients. Sometimes I call for room temperature butter. What temperature should the other ingredients be? Your butter is your guide. So, in a recipe like chocolate chip cookies or a chocolate cake, if your butter is called for at room temperature, your other ingredients should be at room temperature. In this recipe, I use cold butter. So then I have cold milk and cold eggs. So I've got my 3/4 of a cup of milk. And if you checked my recipe before, you can use lots of substitutions. So you can use evaporated milk. You could use oat milk, soy milk, rice milk, coconut milk even would be absolutely delicious. You could use, in a pinch, you're out of milk. You could use skim milk powder dissolved into water. You could even use tea or juice in a pinch. I'm going to crack one egg into the milk, and I'm going to separate my one egg. And I want to keep the white because I'm going to use that to brush on top of the scones to make them nice and shiny and get the cinnamon sugar to stick. So the yolk goes in here, the white goes in here. And you've probably noticed if you've watched my videos over the years, I always crack an egg on a flat surface. You give it one little smack. So instead of tap, tap, tap on the edge of a bowl that creates tiny little shell pieces that are likely to jump into the bowl, one little smack, and then pull the egg apart, and it makes it easier to separate. And you'll find you get a cleaner edge to your eggshell so that it's less likely to catch and you won't break the yolk. So in that goes. I'll give this a little stir. Is everyone doing fine? You're having fun so far? Yeah? Can hear me? And I add this all at once to the dry mixture. Ready, everybody? 1, 2, 3. In it goes. Now we get to have more fun with this. So I'm just going to stir this together just until there's no longer any visible dripping liquid. So you'll see it'll start getting a little more moist. And now, if you've got a clean work area, you want to tip this out, get every last bit of goodness. This is one of those great recipes to make with kids because you can be messy about it. That's actually the point. I'll be right back. Okay. Now, just like when I was flattening the dry mixture between my hands to build those sheets of butter, we want to build some flakiness into this mess right here. And so I'm going to finish working in my wet ingredients by flattening and folding and flattening and folding. So it's basically the same principle as making puff pastry, but just in a more coarse and rougher type of way. But the result is fantastic. And as I do this, with each fold, you can just do it with your hands if you want. This is a bench scraper, but it is easy enough to do with your hands. And you can see how it's coming together, and look at the flakiness that's starting to build in. So now this is where you get to customize your scone. Some people opt for nuts, some chocolate chips, some dried fruits. I decided to go for raisins. I know the original recipe calls for currants, but guess what? I don't have currants. I'm not going to the grocery store for currants. So we're going to use raisins here. And that was actually Michael's choice. He asked for the raisins. And so you see, I've just worked them on top. So as you sort of fold and flatten and fold and flatten, they get worked into the scone itself, but yet you're not really messing with the batter itself. You know what? I'm going to go grab, I'll be right back. I just have to grab a little extra flour. Okay, so are you feeling pretty proud of yourself? Because we've been hanging out for just 20 minutes now, and barring the technical issues, I bet you have a scone dough in front of you. It's pretty impressive. I feel like, especially this time, we're questioning so much about what's happening in the world, that the boost of self confidence that comes from baking something, because it's active, it takes a little bit of attention, and then you have something wonderful to show for it, not just to eat, but in here. And it is about that sense of sharing. Okay, I just want to show you what this scone dough looks like. So you've got this sort of built-in flakiness right now that's ready to go. Now, here's some options for you, because I don't know what your situation is, but I'm running into the issue with only two of us in our house. And because we're social distancing, there is only two of us to feed, other than some door-up deliveries to friends, that I'm trying to be careful not to overbake. So the great thing about scones is, while they're best enjoyed the day they're baked, you can make this dough ahead. So I find this recipe makes 16 small scones, but what you can do is divide this in half, and then this half, this is the one I'll roll, you can wrap and freeze whole like this. You can use your cookie cutter cutout, or you can grab a knife and cut scone wedges. And then these can be frozen. So put these on a plate or a tray, pop them in the freezer, and then you can just pull them out and thaw them to room temperature. It only takes about 20 minutes, half an hour. And then you can custom bake them whenever you want them. And this way you're not overproducing and having food go to waste. So I am actually going to grab a container and do just that. So you're okay, Michael, having some scones for later on?
Yes.
Over the weekend? Okay. All right, now for the remaining, I don't even bother with a rolling pin when it comes to cutting out scones. You don't need to. Flatten it out. Now, you don't want to flatten it out as thin as pie dough. We want these to be nice, tall, flaky scones. So I go to about, I would call that 2 centimeters, or just under an inch thick. I'm using a 2-inch round cutter. You could cut the wedges. You could use a square, another shape, whatever you wish, change the size. And then there, oh, it's the flakiness I love to see in these. Oh, amazing. Now I've got a silicone baking mat on my baking tray here, simply because, just like the currants, I am running low on parchment paper. So the silicone baking mat means I can use it over and over and over and just keep washing it. we go. Is everyone cutting out their scones, picking their shapes? Any shape will do, just so long as they're about the same size. That way they bake evenly. And then with the scraps, of course, you can re-roll them.
Everybody says the live stream is so good and everything looks good.
Okay, we're good. Thank you for your feedback on getting us up and running. Now we'll be all set for the next whatever wonderful thing I make. And I think that should be up to you. Next week, we would love to do Oh Yum 101 and really take something that you want to demystify. Is it pie dough? Is it macaron? Is it croissant dough? Is it lemon meringue pie? So I'll put a survey out on social media and you can vote for what we will spend this time next week talking about. I'll see if the time may change. I know we've got some West Coast people. I saw someone writing from Las Vegas. Woo, you're up early. So we may change the time just to appeal to, we're trying to feed the world here with these beautiful scones. So someone's going to be sleeping at some point. Look at that. Every little bit gets used here. I've got that one little scrap. That won't matter at all. And the last step before these go into the oven. Now, if you don't have your cinnamon sugar ready, don't worry. It's not essential to the recipe. It adds a nice little crunchy layer on top. But what you want to do is take a brush. And if you don't have a brush, guess what? You just stick your fingers in there and tap a little of the egg white on top of each scone. And then we're going to sprinkle it with the cinnamon sugar. Oh, that's a good close-up shot, Michael. Thank you. And then the final touch, little sprinkling of cinnamon sugar here. So if you were making cheddar cheese scones, I think Mika was going to make those, you would skip the cinnamon sugar. But the egg white is nice because it adds a nice shine. All right, these are ready for the oven. They're going to take about 18 minutes. So I'm going to pop them in the oven, set the timer for 15. I always set my timer a couple minutes before they're supposed to be done, just to give a little peek and see how they're doing. All right, I think I have a minute to tidy up. This is the other glamorous side of the business you don't see. Oh my gosh, when I'm taping a baking recipe, the dishes are ridiculous. I have an amazing team of people who help out that way. It makes it much simpler, but I try and keep as tidy as I can when I cook. There we go. I'm going to give my hands a little wash here. And so now this is our time to hang out together. I'm going to take some questions. So if you've washed your hands or you're just simply watching, following along, please, let's talk. It can be questions about this recipe, but it can be questions about any baking whatsoever, because we've got about 15 minutes to just have a little visit. And this is part of the fun part of baking too. Now, I don't have a glass door to this oven because the other thing you can do is just park a stool and watch your goodies bake, because that's part of it too. And I used to love doing that as a kid, and I love seeing pictures of kids waiting for the cookies to come out of the oven. So I'm just going to look aside as I check out the conversation thread here before we check in on those scones. Oh, Lisa, good question. Asked, can you use fresh berries? You can. They will be a little bit messy, and the moisture from them, if you're adding especially raspberries, you may find that the scone dough becomes a little stickier because the juices come out as you even if you gently work them in. I would say frozen berries would actually work better because you could put them into the dough, work them in as you're folding them in while they're frozen, and then you'll find the moisture doesn't leach into the dough itself so much. So that's a very good question, but the flavor and the color would be fabulous. Dee is asking, oh, can I please make pizza dough? Well, not right this second, but you know what? That's a good, maybe we'll put that one on the survey because I have been asked a fair bit about making pizza dough. And especially, I'm going to be right back. Does everyone else have a starter on the go? Because with yeast in shorter supply these days, making a starter is great for your pizza doughs, bread doughs, etc. And it's easy to make. So, do you mind if we take just a quick second? I'll walk you through making an easy starter. So, equal parts by weight, flour and water mixed in a bowl. If you have no yeast whatsoever, you used it all up on your last sourdough bread recipe, then what you can do is take about a tablespoon of plain yogurt and stir that in. That starts getting the fermentation going. You cover the bowl, you just give it a loose stir. It'll be a sloppy mess. And you let it sit on the counter for 2 days. After the first 24 hours, give it a little feed. And that means always equal amounts of flour and water. Give it a little stir, let it sit for another day. And after the 2 days, you should have enough active yeast from just our environment. And then cover it and you keep it in the fridge. And then what you have to do is you feed it every 2 to 3 days. Honestly, I feed mine every 3 days. And you'll find if you're not baking a lot, that you're getting more and more sourdough starter. So, what we used to do before we were all making starters is you would have what's called the discard. You cut it in half and you throw half away. Well, we don't want to waste that. So, we always like to plan our pizza night or making non breads, or you can use the discard because you take some out, feed the new one, put it back in the fridge, use that for pancakes, waffles, pizza dough. There's so many uses for it. So, there's a mini lesson within our lesson. I'm going to just take a peek so I can see your questions as you're writing them. Oh, Perla Smith, good question. Could I do a starter with probiotics? I don't have plain yogurt. I would say that's safe to give it a try. I would start with a tiny amount because ultimately you can even develop that starter without the yogurt. I just find it starts coaxing the acidity and the yeast development faster. So you can do it without the yogurt altogether, but why not give it a try? If you have the flour, just, yeah, 150 grams, I think is a good place to start. And just a pinch, just the tiniest bit of that probiotic. Very good question. Sarah said, I only have 12 scones. I guess they're big. Well, yes, they are. Fantastic. You must have a big cutter. But that is so your bake time will vary. And that actually brings up a good point. You can make tiny, like tea party size scones if you wanted to. Those would take about 12 minutes to bake. Sarah, your 12 large scones will probably take more like 20 to 25 minutes to bake just to make sure they're cooked all the way through. I'm just going to take a quick peek at mine just to see where they are. Ooh, it's only been 5 minutes, but they're already puffing up beautifully. I hope yours are doing the same. Are they looking good? Actually, while I'm at the oven, it brings up a good point. People ask me a lot about baking with a convection oven. So if you have an older model of a convection oven, that means it has the fan that circulates air, and that will accelerate cooking and browning in some things. You can assume the baking recipes call for a still oven temperature. So if I say 350, I mean without a fan. So what you would do is reduce the temperature by 25 degrees. Some of the newer models actually factor that in. So you just have to plug in what the recipe says. Okay, another question. Oh, here, Anuprita asks an interesting question. Why do we separate yolks and whites in some recipes? It's all about the texture. So a typical sponge cake, a Genoise sponge, is whole eggs. And I've got a great recipe for a strawberries and cream, a Victoria sponge style cake. 6 eggs, 200 grams of sugar, 150 grams of flour. Boom, there's your recipe. And you whip the whole eggs with the sugar to get the volume. Sometimes in a chiffon style cake, you separate the eggs and you whip the yolks with the sugar, add the flour, and you whip the whites separately and fold that in. And that gives you an even airier and a a structure that's got finer bubbles to it. An angel food cake has no egg yolks whatsoever. It's only the egg whites, and it's really light and airy. And then when you look at the method, the way we make a cake, sometimes the conventional method, like a chocolate or a vanilla cake, you beat the butter and sugar together, or you combine the flour and work the butter in, and then the eggs and liquid get added at once. That will give you less of a lift, and you just need the whole egg. So really, separating the eggs is usually about coaxing volume out of the whole eggs or the whites altogether. That was a very good question. Oh, Paulette is asking, can I use a toaster oven? I have a very large one, something I would bake bread in. Paulette, you go for it. Yes, you can fit, if you've got an average toaster oven tray like that, you can fit 6 decent sized scones on there easily enough. Just be careful. I don't know where your heating element is, that if it heats on the top, you don't want the top to brown too quickly. So just keep an eye on that. My mom uses a toaster oven all the time for her baking. So I know where that question's coming from. Oh, hi, Juna. Nice to see you again. Welcome again. Nice to see you this week, or hear from you, I should say. You're seeing me. Oh, it's great to have such support and see your notes coming from all over the world. It's absolutely fantastic. Oh, here's a question. Pastry 21. What is Michael and I's favorite date night meal? Well, I can tell you it is. Can I speak for both of us, Michael?
Yes.
Yes. Michael grills a really amazing steak. My favorite cut is a ribeye steak because it's nice and juicy. And we will make, it depends on what time of the year it is. Right now, because our season only hothouse vegetables are available, we call it a chop house salad, but it's sliced tomatoes with, of all things, raspberries on it, crumbled blue cheese, red onion, and we'll just put a little bit of balsamic and olive oil on it, and it's absolutely fantastic. Michael's pointing at me. Oh, here, yeah, these are beautiful hothouse tomatoes that are grown locally. And I feel very lucky living here where being very strict in our social distancing, but we're able to visit farm gate stands. So greenhouse growers will set out a little shed in front of their driveway and offer what they're growing from the greenhouse. So the contact points are minimal. And it's the honor system. So there's not even someone there. And it's a great way to support local growers who may be having a tougher time getting groceries to the big retailers. Okay. Oh, here's a question. Now, because you're writing from all countries around the world, I know your ingredients can vary greatly. So the question from Donata was, what is 2% milk? That is an excellent question. It is cow's milk with a 2% fat content. So maybe you have it called by another name, perhaps partly skimmed would be another name for it. But it's not low fat or non fat milk. And then homogenized milk is usually 3.25% or in that zone. So that's a great question. Oh, question from Alyssa, age 8. Made your lemon thumbprint cookies with raspberry jam and would like to know what I put in mine. Well, I love lemon and raspberry too, Alyssa. So I think that is a great question to ask and a great flavor combination. I've also been known to double up on my citrus flavor, and I would switch out the lemon to orange, and then I would put orange marmalade in the center. And then you know what's really good? If you melt a little white or dark chocolate and drizzle that on top, so you get that chocolate orange combination, that's a good one. Um, I also have a version where I make a peanut butter thumbprint cookie and I put grape jelly in the center. So it's like a peanut butter jelly cookie. That's another good combination. But really, whatever flavor you love, blueberry with lemon is delicious. Or switch to lime. So with just one recipe, you can create so many things, just like we could with this scone, which is why I wanted to make it, so that whatever you have on hand or whatever you know you like, you could put in. Just back to the scones for a second. You may have noticed in that master list when I gave you all the substitutions. And if you need to go back to that, it is the citrus tea scone recipe on Oh Yum. And I have the complete list of substitution and add in options for you. If you wanted to do something like a maple pecan scone, you could pull out the granulated sugar and replace it with maple syrup instead. Just remember, because of the added moisture, you want to reduce your milk by a quarter cup. But those instructions are in the recipe if you go look to that recipe again. Oh, so many questions. Hi, Bonbon812. Can pastry cream be savory? Oh, yes. I have made bacon cheese pastry creams before. One of my personal favorites is a roasted garlic pastry cream. Oh my gosh, you put that in a pie shell, and I've done it where I've topped it with shrimp or actually torched it like creme brulee and it souffles a little bit. So of course, you have to reduce the sugar, but you'll be surprised when you look at a pastry cream recipe. It doesn't call for a ton of sugar, but I would roast garlic, puree it, and work that into the milk as it's heating to really coax out the flavor. So that's a great question. Yes, but you gotta play with your sugar balance a little bit. To Oh, and the question from Isaac Clark is this kitchen we're looking at away from my baking set? Yeah, this is just my home kitchen. And so I have taped a series. If you've seen any of the fresh videos here on Oh Yum, you might recognize the layout of the kitchen. The color is now different because that was a few years ago that we taped it. But yeah, this is the home kitchen. So that's a good question. But you know what that means? I don't actually have those bins with the flour here that I know I love to, and I wish I had space for them in this kitchen. We do have an open kitchen relatively, but I have canisters like most everybody else that I have to constantly fill up. So in the next kitchen run, I think I'm going to put those bins in myself. These are great questions. Oh, Anthony is asking about liquid rennet. Now I missed part of that question. That was the skyr cheesecake, the blueberry skyr cheesecake. And skyr is an Icelandic form of cheese. Even though it's sold in the yogurt section of the grocery store, real traditional Icelandic skyr is actually made like cheese, using rennet to create curds and sour the milk, and then you let it strain. Most of what we buy now that's called skyr is more like Greek yogurt. The reason I know the difference is my husband's background is Icelandic, and his aunts used to make skyr, Christine and Margaret. So he grew up knowing it, and it's got a nice tanginess to it. I didn't catch the full question. It's probably asking where do you buy rennet, and it is not from a regular grocery store, but you can order it online. And what you want to do is make sure if you get it delivered, that it arrives in a cooler. It should be delivered refrigerated and stored refrigerated. And it's got a really long shelf life. It doesn't really spoil. So that's a good question. Um, oh, Sin C from Hong Kong can't really find. Oh, that question disappeared too quickly. Sorry.
How can you substitute buttermilk?
How can I substitute buttermilk? Oh, great question. Great question. Yes, and especially now you may not have access to buttermilk. Oh, I'm going to get back to that question in a minute. Let's check on those scones. Ooh, I am going to give them just 2 minutes more. But just to give you a little indication, I love when they kind of topple over a little bit. I better get my cooling rack ready here. Okay, back to the question of the buttermilk. For every 1 cup of buttermilk called for in a recipe, measure out 1 cup of 1 or 2% milk, so partly skim milk. Pull out a tablespoon and replace that with a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice. Give it a stir in, let it sit for about 30 seconds to a minute, and it will actually tighten up, thicken like buttermilk. The deal with buttermilk is it has acidity to it. So it activates your baking soda in your cake recipes that gives things lots of lift and air, which is why you want to use buttermilk as opposed to regular milk in most cases. You could use buttermilk in this recipe if you wanted to, and it would work out just fine. Okay, let's take one more question. Um, oh, egg substitutes. Cal2103 was asking about, have I tried a particular type of egg substitutes? Now, you bring up a very good question because I don't know where everybody is and different products are available. I try and steer clear of brand specific items in my baking because I want to make sure that no matter where you are, you can make the recipe. So when I have two great options when I'm trying to replace eggs, and they're relatively simple. For things like chocolate chip cookies, banana muffins, a quick cake, a zucchini loaf, I use ground flaxseed. And so for every 1 egg, You stir 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed into 3 tablespoons of water. You let it sit a minute. The protein and fat combination replaces that of an egg. And it's vegan friendly. And the other one is also vegan friendly. So if I'm making a delicate cake, a nice vanilla cake, I have made butterless, eggless butter tarts using silken tofu in place of eggs. Now, a large egg is 60 grams. And so what you need to do is for every one egg called for in that recipe, weigh out 60 grams of silken tofu and you give it a whisk. It's so soft. It's sometimes sold as soft tofu. Give it a whisk with a small whisk in a bowl to smooth it out. And you add it at the same point in the recipe. So you've got two great options. The reason I opt for both is the silken tofu, because it's nice and light and white, won't add a speckle to your cakes. Or if you are making it works in cheesecake too. Where with chocolate chip cookies, it doesn't matter so much. I think it's time to pull these scones from the oven. How are yours doing? Are they ready to come out of the oven? Oh, can you smell them? I can smell I think that's why I put the cinnamon, is more for the smell than the taste. And look at how from just 2 centimeters tall, they popped up. I hope yours did the same. These are, oh, what a treat. They are best enjoyed warm. I'm just going to shimmy this over a little bit. Now you can cool them on your tray until they're just warm enough to handle if you wish. You can pop them back in the oven if you're having them later in the day or tomorrow morning. And you can refresh them. I find once they refresh in the oven, okay, at a low temperature, about 300 or 150 Celsius. And of course, you have to have jam and some butter. Clotted cream. I saw someone post on Instagram or Facebook that they had clotted cream and jam ready for their scones. I wish I had some clotted cream, but I don't. But I have ample amounts of butter. And this is where we all get to feel good about what we've done. Do you feel good about what you did? I mean, if you're here in North America or South America, you've started your day with an accomplishment already. I think it's absolutely amazing. And if this is your little evening project, now you can go take a seat, make a nice cup of tea, and enjoy a freshly baked treat before you end your day. This is strawberry jam. I'm just going to take a pause because I know this is a million degrees right now and I don't want to talk with my mouth full. You know what? I think we did this. I thought it was going to take a full hour. We're good. You're great to do this in under an hour. And isn't it nice? Like a complete project that doesn't have to eat up a whole lot of time. But I definitely want to hear from you. So I'm going to take a few more questions, but I will remind you that I will be posting, and we will be posting through Oh Yum, a poll to see what you would like for Oh Yum 101. So next Thursday, I will do a power session on whatever that one item is. Now, even if it's something that takes longer than an hour, I may have a stage of it or multiple stages for you ready so we can live by example. But I just want to let you know to keep an eye on that, because next week's session is going to be up to you what it's going to be. Your support has been so fantastic today. I'm trying to think if I missed anyone to say hello to. I think I covered everyone in my little neighborhood, including, got to say another hi to mom. Hi, mom. Oh, I must create an online pastry school. Well, this is kind of one now, isn't it? On the fly. I'm so glad we could do this live. Like, this isn't, you aren't just watching and then responding later. I love that we're in this moment together. This has made my day. I hope you realize that. Hello from Lebanon, please. We want recipes for multi-uses, sweet and salty. Ooh, well, that's a good question. Maybe that's the kind of masterclass style we should do. Something like a pie dough, sometimes called pâte brisée, can be applied to sweet or savory baking, or something like puff pastry or croissanto. How adventurous are you ready to get? Mexico. Oh, we've got a macaron question. I think that's another hint that we need to do. I think Oh Yum 101 is going to spread into multiple classes. We've got lots to talk about. And if you were at my live chat last week, I said I could do a whole session just on macaron. The splitting or cracking on top, which is my biggest flaw. I'm okay at getting the feet, but I always get that crack on the top, and it's because I've overfolded. And then I've deflated my macaron batter too much. So I hope that helps your question. A little tip, if you're making macaron on a humid day or a rainy day, to add half a teaspoon of meringue powder helps absorb that ambient moisture that you'll be more likely to have a successful macaron. Oh, Juna, you're starving. Hello to Argentina. Hello to India, Argentina. Oh, you guys are amazing. Okay, Rose, please post the scone recipe again. Thanks. I will make sure that that link, I'll reactivate it so that you can find it. But the recipe with the original video, but this video will go live, or not live. This video will be posted on the OEM site, so you can watch it later. But I will link to the original recipe again, so you can get the full measurements, substitution options, and the full directions step by step. So that was a very good question to point that out. A question about using coconut and almond flour for keto. While I'm not an expert in baking for keto, I do understand baking with coconut flour and almond flour, and it is very much usable. I find that recipes that call for more eggs help with the binding power because you're taking out the wheat flour and you're not using starch in your baking. You need to add structure and set somehow. And so making sure that you use recipes that are egg rich really help that along. I hope that answers your question enough, but there's some great recipes on there. I do have a recipe for little vanilla flour cupcakes that use coconut flour. They aren't keto, but they're a gluten-free recipe that works out very well. Oh, Linda said, my scones are yummy. Oh, I'm glad you're already eating them, but they didn't puff up like yours. Well, you know what? Sometimes you have to go through the recipe once to then go, oh, okay, maybe now that you've felt it, when you work that butter through your hands, if you felt it warming up, that's when you actually stop. And even if you feel you want to, you can pop the dry mixture in the fridge to cool down that butter again before you go to the next step. So if those ingredients are cold, you should be in pretty good shape. You can make these using a stand mixer, but I find the tendency is to overmix them and you just won't get that flakiness. You'll get the cakiness, but not the flakiness. Sarah is asking, how do I know when the scones are, I'm assuming, done? That's a very good question to ask. And I'm looking for the nice even browning on the top and the bottom. You don't want them to get too dark, and you'll see that they don't really brown on the sides. But when you see you've got the set there, you're fine. And just a little tip, if you do pull your scones out of the oven, and if you break into one and you find it's still kind of soft in the center, when they're still hot, you can pop them back in the oven. You can do that with cakes too. If you realize, oh, it's not quite done, so long as it hasn't cooled, you can put it back in the oven to let it go that extra couple of minutes to finish off. The same goes for cookies. I've done that where I've underbaked cookies and then even cooled, I've put them back in the oven. So that's part of my job, is to make the mistakes and try these things so you don't have to. So Linda, I hope you give the scones another try, having been through the process and giving yourself a good dress rehearsal. Injury says her scones aren't rising. Without more information, I can't really say why. If you've got the egg and the baking powder in there, maybe just give them a few minutes more, or make sure your oven is hot enough. A cold oven will melt the butter and the scones will stay flat before they've had a chance. Really need that heat, 375, which is 190 Celsius, to really puff up and become nice and flaky. Can I use, Mistral 111, can I use cake and pastry flour in all desserts? I wish I could say yes. No. In this day and age, when we're trying to make do with what we have, yes, you can make substitutions. But the plain fact is, cake and pastry flour is a finer consistency. It also has a lower protein content, so it won't set quite as well. So you may find if you're using it in a muffin or a cake that they will be a little more dense because they just don't have the structure to hold in the baking powder or egg activity of the lifting. But in a pinch, we're all making do with what we have. Uh, uh, oh, here's a good question for I love practical questions like this. Other than letting us see what you have in the bowl, is there a reason why I use a glass bowl? No, it really is so you can see into the bowl and see what I'm doing. I use glass bowls a fair bit out of habit, but I also use ceramic. And when I'm melting something on the stove, I prefer to use a metal bowl because it conducts the heat quickly, where glass heats up and holds the heat. So if you're melting something like chocolate, it's not the best. That is a very good practical question. Mr. F by Ammon wants to know how to make guacamole. Hey, let's talk. We're here. We've got time. I've got a scone in my hand. So I just take my ripe avocados. I love adding lots of lime juice. I add a pinch of salt right away to help prevent it from turning brown. And then I keep it relatively simple, a little bit of garlic, and then a little bit of cilantro or coriander if you have it. And I keep it as simple as that because it depends on what I'm serving with it. If it's something I want to not go brown quickly, I actually work in lime juice and plain Greek yogurt. And if you blitz that with the other seasonings, it keeps it holds it green for a lot longer. And then you can really pack in things like green onion and coriander. So, hey, guacamole chat. Oh, yum 101. Oh, Stassi Kendall, I hope I pronounced your name right, is asking, what's my best advice for a New York style cheesecake? I am seeing this Oh Yum 101 list getting longer and longer. If you are making New York cheesecake, especially this is a holiday weekend for a lot of people, the whole key is about avoiding cracking. So a couple of quick tips. This is mini 101. When you beat the cream cheese, beat it on a high heat. Scrape your bowl often. Add that sour cream, add your sugar, add it gradually, beat, scrape the bowl, scrape the bowl. It's really boring, but scrape the bowl a lot. The minute you start adding the eggs, slow down the speed. Because if you add air into those eggs as you're whipping your cheesecake, that those air bubbles expand in the heat of the oven, and that can lead to cracking in the cheesecake when it comes out of the oven. And the whole secret to success of avoiding or preventing that crack, because sometimes it doesn't even show up until the next day, is a gradual temperature change. So once that cheesecake comes out of the oven, do not put it in the fridge until it is cooled completely to room temperature. And what I like to do 10 minutes outside out of the oven, I take my palette knife. I'll show you the style I use. A palette knife like this or a larger one, and you run around the inside edge of that springform pan. That loosens it. I can put my scone down now. It loosens the cheesecake. So if it has a tendency, the reason it cracks is it's stuck to the sides, but as it's cooling, it's contracting. So it'll pull from the center. So if you loosen it from the sides, if it wants to contract, then it'll go in slightly and you'll be less likely to get a crack. Great, great questions. I'm going to take one more question because I've been holding this scone and I haven't had a chance to take a bite. But I look forward to seeing you next week. This has been absolutely fabulous. But let's see what question pops up. Da, da, da. Oh, Jack J asks, have I made croquembouche? Well, now, if we want to do a nice 6-hour bake along, we can make some croquembouche together. Croquembouche is that beautiful tower of custard filled profiteroles, cream puffs, essentially, that have been dipped in caramelized sugar, spun around. So you create this sort of crown of sugar threads and you glue them on as you build a tower all the way up. I absolutely love it. Yes, I have made it. Yes, you can find the video on Oh Yum, but that would be a pretty serious bake along. So I think that's a perfect way to wrap things up. I thank you, everyone, for joining me from around the world. I hope you had fun. I hope you have delicious scones. I just think it's amazing that you have something to say for this hour we spent together. And maybe you're going to make them later. I'm going to keep baking over this weekend. And I wish you to stay safe, stay well, stay home, stay baking. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. See you next week. Want one? Mm. Mhm.